Have you ever loved someone so deeply that the truth about who they really were nearly shattered everything you believed in? This isn't just a story about secrets. It's about the kind of love that's tested by the weight of hidden identities and the raw intensity of miracles. Because when the man you trust with your heart turns out to be someone the world's been searching for, and you're carrying not one but 4 lives depending on the truth, you have 2 choices: fall apart or fight to rebuild what's real. Welcome to Impressive Soul Stories, where every tale touches the heart and every twist stirs the soul. Get ready for a journey you won't forget. The moment Bella saw her husband's face on the glossy front page of a business magazine, her world stopped cold. The man beaming in the photo, wearing a sharp navy suit and addressing a room full of tech executives, was the same man who had fixed her broken microwave last month. The same man who'd sat beside her in the neonatal intensive care unit, whispering promises while their premature quadruplets fought to breathe. The same man who once told her he'd lost everything, that he was just trying to survive. The same man who had held her through tears and kissed her temple when she thought she might lose all 4 babies in a single night. Except now the headline read, "Jasper Langston, missing billionaire tech genius found living off the grid." The magazine slipped from her trembling fingers and landed open on the cold hospital floor, his polished image staring back at her like a cruel joke. The same face she kissed each morning, now part of a world she never knew he belonged to, a world of money and power and secrets too heavy to carry. And suddenly, everything she thought was true about their life came crashing down around her like a shattered glass of trust. The nurse walking past paused, concern flashing in her eyes. "Mrs. Langston, are you all right?" Bella's mouth moved, but no sound came out, her throat dry and her thoughts louder than the hallway full of machines and quiet cries. Even her name now felt borrowed, built on something she didn't fully understand. Her mind tried to rewind to 6 hours earlier, when she was holding Jasper's hand and thanking him for being her rock, while the monitors beeped around their 4 tiny babies, each weighing less than 2 pounds. She remembered how he'd kissed her forehead and said they'd get through this, that he'd do anything to protect their family. And now that word, anything, rattled through her head like a warning echoing. Through a cave, her heart thudded painfully as she knelt to pick up the magazine and stuffed it into her bag before walking slowly back toward the NICU, her legs heavy and her breath shallow, the sterile hallway humming with machines and announcements, while her thoughts spiraled with betrayal and disbelief. Inside the unit the air was warm and sacred, the kind of silence only found around the most fragile lives. She stared at the incubators, 2 girls and 2 boys, so small, so fierce, their chests rising and falling with every precious breath like tiny birds fighting the storm. She whispered their names like a mantra: Isla, Grace, Leo, Finn, and tried to remember what was real, what was still hers. Then felt Jasper's presence beside her before she heard his voice. "I brought you coffee," he said softly, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion, same as hers, his jeans faded and soft, his old t-shirt stretched at the collar, the small scar above his left brow catching the soft overhead light. She reached for the cup but didn't meet his eyes. Her fingers brushed his and she flinched. "Bella," he asked gently, "what's wrong?" Her chest tightened, every breath heavy. She looked at the babies again, then back at him. "Are you Jasper Langston?" she asked in a whisper that sliced through the stillness like a scalpel. For a second he didn't move, then his body went completely still, his face unreadable, the kindness still there, but now joined by something else. Regret, maybe fear, maybe the weight of everything he hadn't said. He didn't deny it, didn't speak at all until she pulled the magazine from her bag and laid it between them on the NICU table, his face from another world now staring up at both of them. "I was going to tell you," he said finally, voice low and rough. But she held up a hand to stop him. This wasn't the place, not while their children's lives hung in delicate balance, not when her trust was unraveling by the second. Instead, she turned her eyes back to their babies and whispered, more to herself than to him, "Everything we built, was any of it real?" Jasper didn't answer, not with words, only with his presence, staying beside her as machines beeped and nurses moved gently through the room, and in her mind she was already spiraling backward to the night they met. A rainstorm so violent, the streets of Stillwater had turned into rivers, and she had spotted him huddled beneath the hardware store awning, soaked and shivering, clutching a backpack and pretending he didn't need help. She had brought him hot food and dry socks, and offered him a place in her garage apartment. She thought she was rescuing a drifter, never once imagining she was welcoming a man worth billions into her life. She remembered how he fixed the steps behind her house, rewired the old porch light, brought her breakfast when her shifts at the clinic drained the life out of her. How he made her feel seen, safe, cherished. And now the thought haunted her. Had he been helping her all along, hiding in plain sight with scars too deep to name, pretending to be someone else just to remember how to be human again, she thought, about the way he looked at their babies, like they were miracles born of pure wonder, not statistical impossibility, the way he whispered each name like a vow, like a plea, like an anchor, and yet the silence, the deliberate omission, hurt more than any lie ever could. Outside the NICU glass another baby cried, another mother wept. Life went on despite heartbreak and betrayal and buried identities. And in that moment, Bella realized that, whether Jasper was a billionaire or a drifter, or something in between, she had loved the version of him that held her hand in the dark, and made her believe that no matter how small or broken or exhausted she felt, she was never alone. And now she had to decide whether the truth would unravel them completely, or if it could become the thread that stitched them back together, stronger than they'd ever been before. 3 years earlier, the rain came down in sheets across the cracked sidewalks of Stillwater, turning gutters into rivers and making the neon diner sign buzz with electricity that matched the static tension in the air. Bella had just finished a double shift at the clinic and now worked a few hours at Millie's diner to cover rent and nursing school books, her eyes tired and feet aching as she wiped the last table clean. Her dark hair pulled into a messy ponytail, textbook half open. Beside a plate of fries she hadn't touched, Millie, the silver-haired owner, with a heart as tough as it was generous, slid a cheeseburger onto the counter with a look, "Eat, Bella, you're starting to look like one of your patients." And Bella smiled, grateful for the woman who had become something between a mentor and a second mother. "Finals are next week," she replied. "I can't afford to fail now." Millie raised an eyebrow. "You've been working 2 jobs for 4 years, and you haven't failed yet. That makes you a sure thing in my book." Then nodded her chin toward the window. "Although you might want to save some of that heart for yourself instead of giving it away to every lost soul who wanders by." And that's when Bella noticed him, a figure huddled beneath the narrow overhang across the street, his backpack hugged tightly to his chest, jacket soaked through but back straight, eyes watching the road like he was waiting for something or someone who wouldn't come. "Who's that?" she asked, her voice soft, already knowing she wouldn't ignore what she'd seen. "Been there all day," Millie said. "Sheriff drove by twice and didn't stop. Maybe figured the rain would move him along." But Bella couldn't look away, couldn't quiet the part of her that always wanted to mend what others discarded. "I'll take him some food," she said, packing the untouched fries and cheeseburger into a takeout box and pouring fresh coffee into a to-go cup. "Bella Matthews," Millie sighed, not unkindly, "your heart's going to get you into trouble." "Maybe," Bella replied, "but at least I'll be warm and well-fed while I'm in it." The bell over the door jingled as she stepped into the rain, instantly soaked but focused on her mission. Cars hissed by on the wet road as she darted across. The man looked up as she approached, and even though his face was shadowed by the hood of his jacket, his eyes were startlingly clear, alert, searching her like someone trained to read people. In seconds. "Hi," she said, voice slightly breathless from the cold. "Thought you might be hungry." He didn't move at first, then slowly reached for the food, his fingers brushing hers, and in that moment, Bella noticed things that didn't fit. His hands, though calloused, were precise and clean, his beard unkempt but neatly trimmed at the edges, his posture that of a man who carried weight without ever slouching beneath it. "Thank you," he said, his voice warm and calm and without a trace of desperation. "That's kind of you." She offered the coffee too. "It's from the diner, nothing fancy, but it's hot." "That's perfect," he said, taking a sip and closing his eyes for a moment, like someone remembering something long lost. "I'm Bella," she offered. "I work at the clinic and waitress on weekends, and I have a garage apartment with a bed that doesn't leak, and a heater that mostly works if you need shelter tonight." He hesitated, clearly surprised by the offer. "You don't even know me. I know it's 38 degrees and going to freeze by morning," she replied. "And I know there's no shelter in Stillwater, and the one in Madison's already full." He studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "My name's Jasper," he said. "Jasper Reed," and Bella accepted it without question, because whatever name he gave, she already sensed that it came with stories he wasn't ready to tell, and that was okay. She walked him 6 blocks to her home, a tiny rental with peeling blue paint, and a front door that stuck in the winter, leading him around back to the garage apartment where she kept old furniture and holiday decorations, flipping on the light to reveal a small twin bed, a space heater, and a kitchenette that barely functioned. "It's not much," she said, "but it's warm and dry." He looked around with quiet gratitude. It's more than I've had in a while." And something in his tone made her heart twist. "There's a spare key," she said, setting it on the table. "I leave early for work, but I'll bring groceries tomorrow." He nodded, then added, "Thank you, Bella, for seeing me." And the way he said it made her wonder how long it had been since someone had. The next morning she found the space spotless, a note left on the table thanking her again. And the following days fell into a rhythm. Jasper fixed her broken faucet, cleared the gutters, patched the fence, never asked for anything in return, just offered small acts of service, like someone who didn't know how to accept kindness unless he could give it back tenfold. At night she heard quiet tapping sounds from the apartment, rhythmic like a keyboard, and when she asked what he was working on, he said it was an old watch he found, that he liked fixing things, and Bella believed him because he had a calm way about him, like someone who didn't need to impress just to be useful. The weeks stretched into months, and the man she had taken in from the cold became her roommate. Then her friend. Then slowly, without fanfare, the person she couldn't imagine her life without. She never asked too much about his past, and he never offered, but when he looked at her, it was with the kind of tenderness that told her he didn't want to hide forever, just long enough to remember who he was before the world hurt him, and maybe, just maybe, to learn how to be someone else again. The seasons shifted with a kind of quiet grace in Stillwater, winter melting into a shy spring, and then full-blown summer stretching like golden thread across their little town, and with each passing week, Jasper became less of a guest and more of a fixture in Bella's life, fixing what was broken, tending the yard like it was sacred ground, cooking simple dinners that filled her tiny kitchen with the smell of garlic and something warm and hopeful. And while Bella never asked him to stay, she also never once asked him to leave, because he brought with him a kind of peace she hadn't known she was missing, the kind that seeped in quietly and wrapped itself around her soul without asking for permission. Their relationship unfolded slowly, wrapped in the unspoken understanding of two people who had seen enough pain to tread carefully, their conversations deepening with each late-night talk on the back porch, where fireflies danced and the air smelled like earth after rain. Bella told him about nursing school, about the father who left when she was 10, about the mother who worked 2 jobs and still couldn't afford both rent and dinner, about the string of men who mistook her kindness for weakness and left her worse off than they found her. Jasper listened with a stillness that made her feel safe, like he was storing every word inside a vault where nothing would be twisted or weaponized. He never offered cliches or pity, just nodded when the pauses got heavy and held her hand when the stories stopped coming. And in return, he gave her pieces of his past in fragments, never the whole picture, but enough to make her feel like she wasn't falling for a ghost. He told her about growing up near Seattle, about parents who valued logic and order over affection, about learning to code before he could legally drive, about the college scholarship that changed everything, about building something that once felt unstoppable, then losing it all without ever really explaining how. She didn't push, not then, because the way he looked at her when she laughed or fell asleep on the couch told her everything she needed to know about the present, and for a while that was enough. Their first kiss wasn't planned or dramatic, just a moment on the porch when a summer storm passed, and they were laughing about a broken umbrella. And suddenly the space between them didn't exist anymore, just his hands on her waist and her fingers tangled in his shirt, and the unmistakable feeling that something real had finally found her. After that, everything felt different but also perfectly the same, like the shift in air right before sunrise. Subtle, warm, certain. The town didn't say much, but Bella noticed the knowing glances at Millie's, and the way her neighbor, Mrs. Chapman, started bringing extra tomatoes from her garden, the kind of silent approval reserved for people who'd earned their happiness. And maybe they had, in their own quiet way, building something small but solid, out of trust and ordinary moments. The idea of marriage came gently, like so many things between them. Jasper suggesting they file joint taxes if they were going to keep sharing everything else. Bella laughing and asking if that meant she should get him a ring from the gumball machine by the pharmacy, but deep down she knew it was real. They didn't have a big ceremony, just a quiet exchange of vows in her backyard beneath the same tree where he'd hung fairy lights one evening, just to make her smile after a hard shift. Millie made cupcakes and the mayor signed the license, and that was it. They were husband and wife. And Bella thought that maybe this was what peace felt like, not fireworks and fairy tales, but someone showing up every day with coffee and kindness and the same face she'd come to rely on. And then came the news that turned their small life upside down. It started with the fatigue, then the nausea, then the queasy suspicion that something had shifted inside her body, and Bella, trained nurse and practiced skeptic, stared down at the test with 2 pink lines and a heart that didn't know whether to sing or shatter. They talked about children once, in vague, someday terms, after she got her RN, after they saved more money, after life felt a little less fragile, but now it was happening, and there was no perfect timing. Only this moment, and when she told Jasper she half expected panic, but what she got instead was joy, pure, wide-eyed, breathless joy, as he dropped to his knees and pressed his face to her stomach like he was trying to hear their baby already. "For you're going to be the best, Mom," he whispered, and she believed him until the first ultrasound, when the technician's smile froze and her eyes widened, and she said softly, "I'm just going to get the doctor," and Bella's blood turned to ice, Jasper holding her hand tightly, and the doctor came in with gentle words and a grainy screen and pointed at the shapes. 1, 2, 3, 4, and the room swayed around Bella like a ship in a storm. 4 babies, 4 heartbeats, 4 lives forming inside her all at once. Her brain couldn't catch up to the math, and Jasper was pale beside her but still calm, still steady. "We'll figure it out," he said, and in his voice was something she hadn't heard before, not just reassurance, but command, purpose, like someone who knew how to take 1,000 falling pieces and make them whole again. And even then, even in the middle of that beautiful chaos, Bella didn't see it. The way he made one call and suddenly had a specialist appointment booked in Kansas City. The way he started arranging supplies and equipment they couldn't afford. The way every obstacle that should have taken days was cleared in hours. She was too overwhelmed, too in love, too caught up in the way he painted the nursery at midnight while humming to the wall, too focused on the ache in her back and the way her belly grew with impossible speed, too wrapped in the joy and terror of becoming a mother of 4, to question why the man she married always had answers that felt like magic. And maybe that's how secrets live best, in the cracks between love and exhaustion, in the places where hope burns bright enough to blind you to the shadow behind it. And Bella, for all her training and strength, never saw it coming. By the time Bella reached her 28th week of pregnancy, her world had narrowed to the couch, the bathroom, and the view from her front window, where the leaves had started to fall and Stillwater's air had shifted from sticky summer to the kind of crisp autumn that always made her crave cinnamon and quiet. The babies were growing too fast for her petite frame, and the doctors at the specialist hospital in Kansas City had placed her on strict bed rest with medication to keep the contractions at bay. 4 heartbeats beat under her ribs like overlapping drums, and every new week marked a small miracle. But what should have been the most tender time in their marriage had started to feel like living beside a stranger. Jasper had grown distant, not in the way of fading love, but in the way of someone carrying something enormous that they refused to share. He disappeared for hours with vague explanations, returned home with tension in his shoulders and worry in his eyes, answered calls outside and shut his laptop whenever she walked into the room. And Bella, exhausted and hormonal and full of anxiety, tried to tell herself it was just the stress of becoming a father of 4. But deep down, something gnawed at her, something colder than fear and heavier than doubt. She began noticing the little things. The home health aide he'd hired, Marlene, had a resume far too extensive for small-town availability. The groceries arrived with brands she'd never seen outside expensive cities. And one afternoon, a delivery truck pulled up with a hospital-grade monitoring system she hadn't requested. "We can't afford this," she said, staring at the sleek equipment now being assembled beside her bed. "Don't worry," Jasper replied, not looking up from his phone. "I had some money saved." But that didn't explain the oxygen machine or the specialized twin bassinets now occupying the nursery. It didn't explain the way their medical bills disappeared, or how the driveway got paved overnight by a crew who left behind no invoice and no name. And Bella, bright, kind, practical Bella, finally stopped pretending not to notice. One morning when Jasper left early claiming he had to meet someone from the hardware store, he accidentally left his personal laptop on the kitchen counter. She stared at it for a full 30 minutes, her fingers twitching against her mug, her conscience battling her instincts. And then she opened it, the password screen blinking at her like a dare. She tried their anniversary, then his birthday, then the name of their cat. All wrong. Then suddenly, the screen flashed, and for 2 seconds a window opened, an email subject line half visible before the screen locked. Langston Legal Holdings, Quantum Shield, urgent. The name Quantum Shield scratched at her memory like a ghost. and she grabbed her phone, searching with trembling hands. The articles loaded slow on Stillwater's spotty network, but they came, one after the other, and with each headline, the ground beneath her shifted more. Tech billionaire Jasper Langston disappears amid legal battle. Founder of Quantum Shield still missing after 3 years. Industry visionary or master deceiver. Her heart raced as she scrolled through images, one in particular freezing her in place. It was him, clean-shaven in a black-tailored suit, giving a keynote speech, not the man who cleaned her gutters or slept with his arm curled around her at night, but him, nonetheless, eyes just as sharp, jaw just as steady, but surrounded by a world of power and wealth and headlines, and she couldn't stop reading, couldn't stop falling through the rabbit hole of who her husband really was. And she remembered every moment he'd hesitated before answering a question about his past, every time he'd deflected with a joke or a compliment or a kiss, every tiny clue she'd ignored, because the love was louder than the doubt. And now it roared in her ears, a cyclone of fury and disbelief and something she couldn't name. When Jasper returned home hours later, he found her sitting at the dining table, laptop still open, hands folded over her belly like a gatekeeper. To the truth. "How long?" she asked, her voice low and dangerous. "How long have you been lying to me?" He stopped in his tracks, the kind of stillness that came from survival, not guilt. "Bella," he said, "I can explain." "Can you?" she snapped, her voice breaking. "Because unless you're going to tell me Quantum Shield is a brand of vitamins, I think I already know enough." He crossed the room slowly, but she lifted a hand, stopping him mid-step. "I'm carrying your children," she said. "Our children, and I believed you were a man I found in the rain, a man who needed help, who was rebuilding his life, not a billionaire who vanished to hide from the consequences of his empire." "It wasn't like that," Jasper said, and his voice cracked for the first time in all the time she'd known him. "I wasn't hiding from you. I was hiding from the world." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust the man who had sung to her belly and painted clouds on the nursery wall and cried the day they heard all 4 heartbeats at once. But there was a crack now between them, and inside it grew something ugly and thick with doubt. "You lied to me," she whispered, and just then pain lanced through her side, sharp and sudden and searing. She gasped, hands going to her stomach. "Bella," he said, rushing to her side as she doubled over. "It's happening," she whispered. Too soon. The world blurred as he called 911, his voice all command and urgency, barking details she didn't understand. And when the paramedics arrived, Bella was crying and shaking and terrified, not just for her babies, but for her marriage, for the life that now felt like a stranger's dream. The sirens wailed, and the ambulance raced through the fading light, and beside her Jasper held her hand and kept whispering, "It's going to be okay, I promise." But promises from a stranger mean little when your whole world is unraveling by the second. The ambulance blazed down the highway, with lights cutting through the dusk like a warning no one could ignore. And inside, Bella gripped Jasper's hand, while fighting against the pain that rolled through her in waves, stronger and closer together, her body too early, too small, too unready for the lives inside her that now kicked and twisted, like they knew the world wasn't supposed to meet them yet. Jasper sat beside her, silent and pale, his other hand shaking against his leg as the paramedic called out vital signs, contractions 4 minutes apart, fetal heart rates dipping and recovering, and through the haze of panic, Bella heard something strange, Jasper's voice changing, growing more assertive, more official. "This is Jasper Langston," he said, into his phone. "Get Dr. Chen, neonatal trauma team on standby, emergency cesarean likely." The paramedic turned slightly at the name, and Bella blinked through the pain, watching the way her husband seemed to transform into someone else entirely, his posture rigid, his commands precise. And by the time they reached University Medical Center, a full team in scrubs waited at the emergency entrance like they were expecting royalty. "Dr. Chen is prepped," a nurse said, and Jasper nodded, squeezing Bella's hand as they wheeled her into triage. "I'm here," he said again. "No matter what happens, I'm not leaving your side." And she wanted to believe him, wanted so desperately to forget what she knew now and focus on the lives they were fighting for. But the betrayal still burned at the edge of her breath, an ache beneath the sharper pain of labor. Everything became a blur, bright lights, rapid footsteps, doctors speaking a language she could no longer translate. Her gown lifted, the cold swipe of antiseptic against her belly. The anesthesiologist's calm voice as he prepared the spinal block. Jasper, dressed in scrubs, eyes wild above his mask, crouched beside her head in the operating room. "We have 4 babies in distress," Dr. Chen said calmly. "This will—" "Move quickly, Bella, stay with us." And then the cutting began, the gentle tug and pressure followed by the first cry, thin, weak but real. "Baby A, female, 2 pounds, 3 ounces, the nurse called, followed seconds later by more cries. More numbers, more frantic movement. Baby B, male, 2 pounds, baby C, female, 1 pound. 14 ounces, baby D, male, 1 pound, 12. The room spun with motion. As each infant was whisked away to a separate NICU station, teams of specialists surrounding them, attaching tubes, adjusting oxygen, inserting lines into veins that looked thinner than threads. Jasper remained still, his hand tight on hers, his eyes glistening as he looked back and forth between their children, the fear in him so raw she could feel it through her fog. And then something shifted in the air. Monitors beeped louder. A doctor cursed beneath his breath. "She's bleeding." Someone said BP crashing, code red, hemorrhage protocol. The anesthesia deepened, her body too tired, too empty, too drained, and just before the darkness claimed her, she felt Jasper's lips on her forehead and heard him say, "I love you. Stay with me. Don't you dare go." And then everything fell away. Time warped into nothing, and when Bella opened her eyes again, the world was quiet. She was in a recovery room, the ceiling still and pale above her, her body aching but her womb empty. A nurse smiled softly from the corner. "You're awake, good." And Bella's first word was, "Babies," her voice barely more than a breath. "Alive," the nurse said. "In the NICU. All 4 stable for now. You lost a lot of blood. We nearly lost you too." And with that the tears came, silent and hot and unrelenting, because she had made it. They had made it. And yet everything was broken. Her body, her trust, her heart. And she didn't know how to put any of it back. Together, Jasper arrived minutes later, eyes shadowed, beard rough, wearing the same clothes from yesterday. And when he saw her awake, he dropped into the chair beside her, like gravity had finally pulled him down. "They're okay," he said, his voice cracking. "They're all okay for now, Bella. You did it. You saved them." But she didn't feel saved. She felt like she had fallen through the floor and was now staring up from some deep place where everything looked unfamiliar. "I need to see them," she whispered, and Jasper helped her into the wheelchair the nurse brought in, her legs shaky, her mind spinning, and the elevator ride to the NICU felt longer than anything she'd endured. And when she saw them, 4 clear boxes filled with wires and machines, and the smallest human beings she had ever laid eyes on, her heart shattered and reformed in the same second. Isla, Grace, Leo and Finn, each of them translucent and curled like question marks, their lungs working with the help of machines, their fingers twitching, their hearts brave enough to keep beating in a world they weren't meant to enter yet. She sat there for what felt like hours, whispering their names, watching them breathe, and Jasper stood beside her, quiet, reverent, hands in his pockets like he didn't quite belong. And when they returned to her room, when the nurse had left and the door was closed, she turned to him with her voice still raw. "You saved our son's life in that ambulance," she said. "You called in favors only a billionaire would have, didn't you?" Jasper didn't answer, just looked at her with the kind of sorrow that made her want to scream. "Why didn't you tell me, Jasper? Why didn't you let me love you fully?" And his shoulders slumped, the weight of truth too heavy to dodge any longer. "I wanted to tell you," he said, "so many times, but I didn't know how. I was afraid that once you knew everything would change, and I didn't want to lose this, lose you." And she laughed bitterly. "Well, you lost my trust instead." He knelt in front of her then, not with a proposal or an apology, but with a kind of humility she hadn't seen before. "I don't expect forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever," he said, "but I need you to know that I never faked 1 second of this. Our life, our love, our family, that's the most real thing I've ever known." She closed her eyes, thinking of the babies breathing behind glass, the man kneeling at her feet, and the storm of love and lies they would now have to survive. The next morning, Bella was wheeled into the NICU with a fresh IV taped to her hand, and a firestorm of emotions twisting inside her like a wire pulled too tight. The babies were still in their incubators, tiny chests rising and falling with rhythmic fragility, and as she sat beside them whispering their names through the plexiglass, she felt the weight of it all pressing into her. Life, survival, betrayal, love, and the gnawing ache of not knowing what parts of her life had been real and what had been curated by the man who now stood silently behind her. Jasper hadn't tried to talk again, hadn't pushed her for answers or forgiveness, just stood with, his hands folded tightly, like he was holding himself together piece by piece. "Talk," she said finally, not looking at him. "Start from the beginning, and this time I want everything." He sat in the plastic hospital chair beside her, his voice low but unwavering. "My name is Jasper Langston, full name, no aliases, no lies, founder of Quantum Shield, a company I started with my college roommate in a basement lab at MIT. We built encryption software so advanced it got picked up by the government within a year, and within 5 years we were valued at over 10 billion. Bella stared at the babies, listening without reacting. "Then the problems started," he continued. "My partner, Shane, he wanted to sell access to our software to overseas agencies, governments with records I couldn't stomach. And when I pushed back, he started cutting me out, spreading rumors to the board. Suddenly I was labeled unstable, unpredictable, even dangerous. Within weeks, legal notices arrived. Internal audits were opened, and Shane presented a security breach traced back to my logins. Fabricated, completely, but convincing enough to make me radioactive." Bella's breath caught, but she said nothing. Her fingers pressed gently to the side of Isla's incubator. "The board asked me to step aside. Just temporarily, they said, but I knew. Better, I was being erased from my own creation, and so I walked away. Not just from the company, but from the life, the noise, the headlines, the attorneys, everything." Jasper paused, his eyes wet now. "I took what I could, liquidated what wasn't frozen and disappeared, shaved my beard, changed my name, lived out of motels and shelters, tried to figure out if I was more than just a man who built a company, and lost it. And then you ended up under the awning across from Millie's," Bella said quietly. "Soaked and alone." Jasper nodded. "And you saw me. You didn't know who I was, didn't care what I'd lost. You just saw a man who looked cold and hungry, and you gave me your warmth without asking for anything. In return, no one had done that in years." Bella finally looked at him, her eyes sharp but not cruel. "So why keep lying after you moved in? After we became a thing? After we got married? After I got pregnant? Why wait until I found out?" "The worst possible way," and Jasper leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands rubbing his face like he was trying to erase the guilt from his skin. "Because the longer I lived with you, the more I loved what we had, the more I feared the truth would destroy it. I was no longer the man in the suit on the magazine cover. I was your husband, your handyman, the guy who made you tea when your ankles swelled, and built a shelf for every single baby book you couldn't stop collecting. And I didn't want to go back to being someone who people only liked because of his last name or bank account. I wanted to be yours." Bella was quiet for a long time, the steady beeping of 4 monitors filling the silence, and then she said, "I loved you when I thought we had nothing. I would have loved you with everything too, if you had let me." Jasper's face broke then, not dramatically but quietly, the way a man shatters when the cost of hiding is finally tallied in full, and still Bella didn't touch him. Her body ached, her heart bruised, but she was thinking now, not just feeling. "What happens now?" she asked, and Jasper took a breath that seemed to burn on the way out. "We stay here with them until they're healthy enough to come home, and then we rebuild whatever you're willing to let me rebuild. No lies, no secrets." "Do you still own part of Quantum Shield?" Bella asked suddenly, and Jasper blinked, caught off guard. "Technically, yes," he said. "Though I'm no longer involved, my shares are held in trust, but I've kept quiet, stayed out of it." "Don't," Bella said, her voice firm now, her old strength returning like a tide. "If what you built is being used to hurt people, then you need to reclaim it. For the babies. For yourself." He looked at her then like he was seeing her for the first time again, not just as the woman who rescued him from the rain, but as someone capable of staring down his ghosts and daring him to face them too. "You really think I can do that?" he asked. "I think you have to," she replied, "because I'm going to raise these children to know truth matters, and you need to show them how to face theirs." That night Jasper didn't sleep. Instead he sat by the babies one by one, whispering promises into incubators, while Bella watched from her bed. And in the morning he made the first of many calls. To attorneys, not as a broken man begging to be let back in, but as the founder of an empire demanding accountability, and for the first time in months, Bella felt like they might just survive this, not because they had money or lawyers or a legacy to restore, but because they had told the truth, finally. And truth, no matter how late it arrives, always gives you a place to begin again. 3 weeks after the emergency birth, Bella sat in the NICU rocking chair with a fleece blanket across her lap, and her arms cradled around a bundle of wires and tubes and warmth that barely weighed more than a loaf of bread. Grace had finally reached the threshold where brief skin-to-skin contact was safe, and the first time Bella held her, she cried so quietly, the nurses pretended not to notice, just stepped away with watery smiles as she whispered lullabies and promises into her daughter's delicate ear, each breath a miracle. each moment a defiance of statistics. Across the room, Jasper stood at Leo's incubator, tracing his finger gently against the clear shield, his voice a low murmur as he read aloud from the baby book Bella had written in since her second trimester, the one with scribbled prayers and notes about cravings and names they never used. And though they hadn't talked much since the morning of his confession, there was something new forming between them, an understanding, raw and complicated, that came not from words, but from presence. He had not left the hospital once, not even to sleep properly, instead dozing in chairs, bringing Bella fresh coffee, learning to read the NICU monitor rhythms like a second language, and when Thomas developed a heart murmur that nearly collapsed his lungs, Jasper didn't panic. He made a call, used a name, and had a specialist flown in by helicopter before the attending physician had even finished briefing them, and Bella watched it happen with awe and disbelief. This man who once seemed like a mystery, wrapped in quiet charm, now wielded his former life like a weapon to protect their children, not for status, not for attention, but because it was the only way he knew how to fight. And the nurses began to call him Sir Langston behind his back, half in jest and half in reverence, because no matter what his past was, no one could deny the way he hovered like a guardian over those 4 tiny cribs. Bella started to soften then, not because she'd forgotten the lie, but because every day he kept showing up like someone who understood what real redemption meant. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline and the monitors blinked softly in the twilight, Jasper wheeled Bella back to the suite he'd rented above the hospital, and instead of going to bed, she sat at the dining table and said, "Show me everything." And Jasper didn't ask what she meant. He just opened his laptop, entered a password she now knew by heart, and brought up folder after folder: financial records, internal memos, photographs of patents, old emails, and one folder labeled Quantum Legacy that contained letters he'd written but never sent, some to her, some to the board, some to the version of himself he used to be. And Bella read them slowly, carefully, asking questions where she needed to, but mostly just listening, piecing together the full scope of the life he'd abandoned and the one he was trying to build in its place. "You never stopped being the man who built this," she said at one point, and Jasper looked at her with something like shame. "I didn't think I deserved to be him anymore," and she shook her head. "Then maybe it's time you start acting like someone who does." The next day, Jasper drafted a letter to the Quantum Shield Board, not requesting reinstatement, but demanding investigation into Shane's activities, laying out his timeline, attaching proof, and CCing 3 of the industry's most respected investigative tech journalists. And within 48 hours, the tech world buzzed with the return of Jasper Langston, not as a ghost or a scandal, but as a man who had quietly rebuilt his soul while everyone else thought he'd disappeared. Bella watched from the sidelines, refusing press interviews, ignoring the curiosity from former colleagues who had once whispered about her being a gold digger or a mystery wife, because she knew the truth, knew the version of Jasper who unclogged her kitchen sink and kissed her forehead when she cried, and more importantly, she knew the version of herself who had chosen him without knowing his bank account or last name. And now, for the first time in weeks, she started to believe they might just be okay. When Grace hit 3 pounds, Bella and Jasper threw a celebration in the NICU waiting room with cupcakes and paper crowns for the staff, and even Dr. Chen stayed 10 minutes longer than her shift to hold little Isla in her arms and whisper, "You're going to move mountains, sweet girl." And when all 4 babies passed the 24-hour no-incident milestone, the nurses clapped, and Bella cried again, not out of fear this time, but out of sheer unfiltered relief that night. She lay on the hospital suite's couch, too tired to make it to bed, and Jasper covered her with a blanket and kissed her temple, then paused as if asking permission for something unspoken. "Do you still love me?" he asked quietly, his voice stripped bare, and Bella, eyes closed, murmured back, "Yes, but I'm loving the whole of you now, not just the man I thought you were." And in that moment something real and vast settled between them, not forgiveness exactly, but a beginning. And when she finally slept, she dreamed not of betrayal or hospitals or broken trust, but of a backyard swing, sunlight, through leaves, and 4 small voices calling her name, and she knew that what they had now wasn't perfect, but it was true. By the time the babies reached their 5th week in the NICU, each of them had gained at least a pound, their eyes beginning to open wider, their fingers curling around the tip of Bella's pinky with tiny strength that made her heart ache with pride. And for the first time since that terrifying night in the ambulance, the doctors spoke of going home, not tomorrow, Not next week, but eventually, a word Bella clung to like a lighthouse in fog. She spent hours holding them one by one, memorizing the shape of their hands, the tone of their cries, the way Grace flinched at sudden light, and Leo kicked with his legs as if he were already running toward the world. And every day Jasper was there beside her, feeding, rocking, singing lullabies he didn't know he remembered until the words tumbled from his lips. And the nurses, once reserved around him, now teased him gently, calling him Captain Langston as he learned to swaddle faster than any of them could manage. His old world still moving in the background, Quantum Shield's board had officially launched a full audit of Shane's activity. The press flooded inboxes with requests. Venture capital firms offered deals he hadn't asked for, and yet he never once let that world steal time from the one inside the NICU, where his children slowly claimed victory over each breath. Bella could feel the change in him, not a return to the cold precision of a CEO, but the rise of someone who had learned how to lead with heart instead of ego. And one morning, just after Finn passed his final respiratory test, Jasper turned to her in the elevator, his voice low. "I want to tell our story, not for the public, not for sympathy, but because I think someone out there needs to hear it." Bella blinked, caught off guard. "You mean, go public?" he nodded. "On our terms." And though every instinct in her screamed for privacy, she also understood the power of truth when shared. So they agreed. One interview, one platform, one story, told not by a journalist, but by them. Her video recorded in their hospital suite, where Bella sat cross-legged on the couch with Grace in her arms, and Jasper beside her holding Isla. And for 25 uninterrupted minutes they talked about love, loss, deception, discovery, and the fight it took to build something honest out of something broken. Jasper spoke candidly of his past, his mistakes, his fear of being loved for the wrong reasons, and Bella, steady and open, told the world that love without truth is just performance, and truth without love is too sharp to hold. When the video aired, the world responded not with scorn but with something more powerful. Understanding. Thousands of comments flooded, from people sharing their own stories of rebuilding, of learning to trust again. And though some headlines still spun drama from their pain, the dominant tone shifted to something kinder, one that echoed Bella's message that identity is not always something you inherit. It's something you choose every day, in how you show up for the people who matter most. And a week later, the hospital's head of PR approached them gently with a request. Would they be willing to speak at the upcoming benefit gala? A fundraiser for NICU expansion. Jasper hesitated, but Bella answered yes before he could, not because she wanted the attention, but because she wanted people to understand that miracles don't always look like lightning bolts. Sometimes they're slow, covered in tubes, and born too early to cry properly, but still miracles all the same. And when the night of the gala arrived, Bella wore a navy dress Jasper had surprised her with, her hair pulled back and her hands shaking only slightly as they stepped into the ballroom. The twins, safely monitored, sat upstairs in a special NICU pod created just for that night. The crowd hushed as they walked to the podium, and for the second time in their life together, they told the truth to strangers, but this time with no shame, only purpose. And when they finished, there was silence, then applause, real warm, thunderous applause from people who now understood that survival isn't just physical, it's emotional, spiritual, relational. And afterward, as they stood together on the terrace looking out over the city, Jasper wrapped his arms around her and said, "This is the second hardest thing I've ever done." And she smiled against his shoulder. "What was the first?" "Looking into your eyes the night you found the magazine and knowing I might lose everything," he said. And for the first time, she understood just how deeply his silence had cost him, and maybe, just maybe, how much his truth had saved. Then 2 days later, Leo was cleared to come home, followed by Isla and Grace. And Finn, always the fighter, stayed one more week before his numbers finally held steady. And then, just like that, their house, once a quiet place of teacups and baby books, was filled with the sounds of 4 infants testing their lungs and a tired couple learning to navigate feedings, diapers, and moments of shared laughter in the middle of chaos. And though Bella still flinched sometimes when Jasper's phone rang, or when a new headline mentioned his name, she also found herself reaching for his hand in the quiet, finding comfort in the steadiness he brought, not because he was powerful, but because he had finally chosen to be present. And one night, as she rocked Grace under the soft glow of the nursery nightlight, she whispered, "I forgive you." And Jasper, standing behind her with a bottle in one hand and tears in his eyes, nodded once, not speaking, because some moments are too sacred for words. It had been nearly 3 months since the babies came home, and the rhythm of their new life was a strange and beautiful kind of chaos, filled with the endless churn of feedings, diaper changes, midnight shifts that blurred into morning, and the constant shuffle of bassinets around their living room, which now resembled a tiny nursery more than a space for adults. Bella often joked that time had become a fog, measured only by nap windows and the number of bottles in the sink. But in the middle of it all, something fierce and steady had awakened inside her, a voice that had once gone quiet under the weight of love and betrayal. Now growing louder with each passing day, she started journaling again during the baby's naps, jotting down pieces of their story, not for the internet or the media, but for them, for Isla and Grace and Leo and Finn to read one day, and know exactly what their parents had endured to bring them home. Jasper, meanwhile, had slowly begun stepping back into the world he had once abandoned, meeting with lawyers, taking calls. With the new interim board, carefully, intentionally laying the groundwork for not just a return but a reformation. He didn't want to just reclaim his company. He wanted to make sure it never again became the kind of place where power could silence principle. And though Bella watched him with cautious eyes at first, wondering if the version of Jasper she loved would disappear under boardroom lights, she soon realized something had changed permanently in him. He still wore jeans more than suits, still kept his phone on silent when feeding the babies, still read aloud the letters people wrote them after their story went viral. And one night, after they finally got all 4 babies down and collapsed onto the couch, he looked over at her and said, "I want you to come with me to New York." Bella, in her oversized sweatshirt and messy bun, blinked at him like he'd spoken in code. "New York," she repeated. "As in business trip. As in board vote," he said. "I want you beside me when I walk into that room and take back the seat I built from scratch. I want you to see that you didn't fall in love with a fraud. You fell in love with a man who lost his way and found his compass in you." And for a long moment she didn't answer, just stared at the man who had once fixed her porch light and now asked her to walk into the heart of a world she'd never known. "Okay," she said finally, "but I'm bringing a breast pump and I refuse to wear heels." Jasper grinned and nodded. "Deal." They flew to New York 3 days later. The babies safely at home with Millie and a small army of nurses Jasper had vetted like Secret Service agents. Bella stared out the window as the skyline came into view, glittering and impossible and far too fast. But somehow she wasn't afraid. The board meeting was held in a high-rise that smelled of money and ambition, and as they walked into the glass conference room, Bella felt every pair of eyes turn toward her, not with judgment, but with curiosity, maybe even respect. Jasper stood tall at the head of the table, no longer hiding, no longer shrinking, and when he spoke he didn't defend himself. He declared himself, laying out a vision not of revenge but of integrity, transparency, and innovation. And when the vote was called, Bella reached for his hand beneath the table and squeezed once. 12 in favor, 1 abstain, none against. Jasper Langston was reinstated, and when it was done, he didn't make a speech, didn't gloat, just turned to Bella with eyes that said everything and whispered, "Let's go home back in Stillwater." The days unfolded like the slow bloom of something planted deep and watered with patience. Bella began writing in earnest, crafting a memoir of sorts, part love story, part survival manual, part letter to her future children. And though she had no plan to publish, Jasper read every chapter she shared, always pausing to underline his favorite lines, often circling the ones about second chances. And their house became a haven again, no longer heavy with secrets but alive with the noise of babies and the quiet strength of a couple who had built something indestructible, not because it was flawless, but because it had survived fire and come out stronger. And one evening, as the sun painted their backyard in shades of gold, Bella sat with all 4 babies spread across a picnic blanket while Jasper grilled hot dogs 2 feet away, humming softly as he checked the buns, and she looked around and realized that for the first time in months, maybe years, she felt something rare. Peace, not the fleeting kind that arrives between storms, but the lasting kind that stays because it's been earned hard and honestly. And when Jasper knelt beside her and said, "I never imagined we'd get here," she looked at him, eyes full of wonder, and whispered back, "That's because we didn't imagine this. We fought for it." And he kissed her softly while 4 tiny humans wriggled around them, proof that some stories don't need rewriting, only the courage to finish. The sun had barely risen on the first anniversary of the quadruplet's birth, but the house was already filled with the sounds of early morning, faint cries from the nursery, the clatter of pots as breakfast was being made, the shuffle of footsteps, across the hardwood floors, and the distant hum of the coffee machine. Leah stood in the kitchen, eyes glinting with exhaustion but also with something much deeper, gratitude, a quiet joy that had taken root in her heart over the last year, one that had come slowly, like a seed pushing through the soil. The babies, now toddling, each with a distinct personality starting to emerge, were healthy, strong, and thriving. Emma, their firstborn daughter, had a laugh that could fill the house, while Hope, the second girl, still carried the quiet sensitivity that had marked her from birth. Leah was an adventurer, always reaching for new heights, and Thomas, the smallest of the bunch, had a stubbornness that made his doctors smile despite his early challenges. She felt their presence in the way the walls of their home seemed to pulse, with the rhythm of their lives, a steady heartbeat grounding them, pulling them together even on the hard days when everything felt too much. Evan had settled into the role of father in a way that surprised her, not because she hadn't believed in him, but because he had taken on the weight of their family with humility and pride, no longer the man who hid behind a facade of simplicity, but one who embraced the full complexity of who he was. He had rebuilt his life not just around his children, but around Leah, around the truth they had built together from the fragments of their past. The truth was never as simple as black and white. It was layered, messy, full of contradictions, but it was theirs, and it was real. Evan had spent the last few months working from home more often than not, having taken on a role that allowed him to reclaim some of his old life with Quantum Shield, but on his terms, not as the CEO, not as the billionaire, but as a man who had something more important now, his family. The public had begun to accept him, not with adoration or fame, but with quiet respect, as the man who had returned not for the spotlight, but to repair the damage done to his name by those who had tried to destroy him. And with each passing day, Leah saw a little more of the man she had fallen in love with, not just in the quiet moments when he held their babies close or whispered sweet things in her ear, but in the way he led, in the way he moved through the world with honesty, not arrogance. When the foundation had begun funding housing for families with premature infants, Leah found herself in her element, connecting people, sharing her story, using the lessons she had learned from her own experiences to help others who were struggling. She had always been a healer, but now, with her RN degree and her newfound confidence, she was healing in ways she had never imagined, not just in the clinic, but through every conversation she had with a new parent, every support group she led, every person who walked into their home in need of help. As the years went on, they began to shift from survival mode to truly living, raising 4 extraordinary children in a home full of love and laughter, surrounded by a community that had seen them through their darkest hours. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were thriving. Leah looked up from the kitchen counter as Evan walked in, his eyes immediately finding hers as he reached for his coffee cup. He had just finished a long call with some colleagues from Quantum Shield, discussing new directions for the company, but this morning his thoughts were entirely on their family. He leaned over, kissing her on the cheek, his hand resting on the small of her back. "Morning," he said softly, his voice laced with a warmth she still found startling after all they had been through. "Morning," she replied, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Their eyes met, and for a moment everything else in the world disappeared. The trials, the betrayals, the difficult truths, all of it faded, leaving just the two of them, standing there in this quiet moment. "You know," Evan said, taking a sip of his coffee, "I never imagined life would turn out like this." Leah raised an eyebrow, her tone teasing. "Better or worse?" He chuckled, his face softening. "Better, much better, with you." She smiled, the warmth of it spreading from her chest outward. "Me too." The babies were already starting to wake up, their little voices calling from the nursery, and as they both moved to get breakfast ready, there was a sense of peace between them, a quiet certainty that their journey, though unpredictable and sometimes painful, had brought them to exactly where they were supposed to be, and that was enough. They had built something together, something worth holding on to, and it wasn't defined by wealth or success or status, but by the love they shared and the family they had created. They had crossed a line, yes, a line between who they had been and who they were now, and there would always be memories of the man he had been, of the struggles they had faced. But as they walked down the hall toward the nursery, hand in hand, their hearts full of dreams for the future, they understood that the past, no matter how it shaped them, didn't define who they were anymore. It was the love they had for each other and the family they had fought so hard to protect that mattered most. And as they opened the door to the nursery, watching their 4 children stretch and smile in the early morning light, Leah realized something profound. This, right here, was the life she had chosen. This was her miracle, and she had never been more certain that it was exactly where she was meant to be. If this story moved you, give it a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs it, and hit subscribe. At Impressive Soul Stories, the next chapter is always more powerful than the last. Stay blessed.